Okay, today I am getting to speak to somebody that I kind of know. His name's Bill Van Loo. He's a guy I met a long time ago as part of the kind of Max world. And we, in fact, even had a chance to eat like Mexican food and talk smart about audio routing at one time up in Boulder. He and I have been kind of like following each other on Facebook for quite a while, and I noticed that he was getting pretty active in the Ann Arbor area, and he and I got talking about some stuff, and next thing I know, he mentions this thing called the North Coast Modular Collective, and I looked it up, and I was intrigued, and I read more, and I was more intrigued, and then I finally decided we needed to talk about it for the podcast. So what we've done is we actually have kind of put together one of the rare multi-person interviews. So tonight I have Bill Van Loo, and I also have Joe Bauer, who the two of them are both members of the North Coast Modular Collective. And so with that, I'm going to shut up and let them talk. Hey guys, how's it going?
It's great. How are you, Darwin?
I'm great. Thanks so much for taking the time to have the chat. I really appreciate it. Why don't we start off by having you guys talk a little bit about what you do and what the North Coast Modular Collective is all about?
Sure. Well, so the first thing I want to say, actually, before we start talking about that is just I wanted to take a chance to thank you, not just for having us today, but also to thank you for the work that you've done in terms of building community. That's one of the core things that North Coast is all about. And listening to your podcast and getting information from other designers and musicians and community builders has been a real inspiration and a real influence on what we're doing here. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
I really appreciate it. It's actually really great to hear that this can have an influence like that.
Yeah. So I'm going to let Joe start with talking some about what North Coast is and what we do, and then I'll add on a piece as well.
Great.
Hey, this is Joe. So North Coast Modular Collective, we're really a collective of 7 core kind of organizers, and then we have a wider group of people who are kind of the common people who come out and hang out with us from time to time. And we're really kind of focused on music and instruments and community. And so it's, like Bill said, we listened to that Rocky Mountain synth meetup episode probably
Right.
too many times. What we were really trying to do is something kind of like a meetup, but also kind of like a maker group, and also kind of like a group of artists who are banding together, who all don't have enough time, but when we all get together, we kind of help each other out and end up making something really kind of cool all together.
That sounds really cool. Now, one of the things I will say for the listeners is one of the things that you can do if you're listening to this while you're driving, don't do it now, but at some soon point, jump over to northcoastmodularcollective.com. You'll know at the right place when you get a great animation of a laser cutter burning up some wood. It's like the wood burning kit I always really wanted when I was 12 years old, right? It looks pretty awesome.
Yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah, but you'll find out a lot more about what they do and some of their stuff, as well as getting a chance to do some of what I did, which was taking a peek. You guys have shot some video of some of your gatherings and stuff, and I got a chance to actually watch some of those, and they're really great because some of it is sort of educational, some of it is sort of performative, some of it is like, hey, check out some gear. It's a really interesting mixture. And then when I look at sort of what the content of your meetings are, it's similar to that. It really bridges a lot of interests. Now my question is this an interest that everyone shares, or do you just throw it out there hoping that at least somebody is interested? I'm curious about how you make the selection, because it's a pretty broad selection of stuff.
Yeah, so, Joe mentioned that music and instruments and community, those 3 things are kind of our core things that we're focused on as a collective. And so the public meetups are the big part of the community aspect of what we're doing. So we really have kind of lifted that outline or format from the Rocky Mountain Synth meetup kind of wholesale, and we've started tweaking it some. Our group, in a lot of ways, started as sort of a private meetup of 4 or 5 of us, and then that kind of grew to the core 7 of us. And a few months ago, we decided that we really needed to bring more people in, give a chance for more people to be involved, and that's when the public meetup started. So it's really kind of been, up until now, with our first few, it's been the 7 of us core organizers thinking about a topic that we were interested in, right, and then figuring out who in the core organizing group could present about that, but also then starting to reach out to other people from the community to have a chance to present. So this most recent one, for example, I presented about different ways of sequencing. Another one of our collective members, David Minix, presented about Euclidean sequencing with pure data. Mm-hmm. And then a local DSP engineer in the community came and talked about some of her work in developing DSP. And then we got a really exciting surprise guest, Andrew Belt, who does VCV Rack, actually right, is in Michigan, and kind of dropped in and talked for 45 minutes or an hour about the future of VCV Rack. So it was a pretty interesting one.
Well, that's pretty great. Now, I have to admit that you already caught me. I sort of conflated the public meetings with the collective. But tell me a little bit about what it is that the collective, the group of 7 of you, do that is unique or makes you want to be a collective rather than people who go out for a drink every once in a while.
Yeah, drinks are good, certainly. But yeah, the 7 of us, we're of a like mind in some ways, but also we have very different backgrounds as well. So we have people who are like research consultants like myself, or tech ed teachers and makers. We have programmers. We've got Pearson who does technology training. We've got web developers. We've got one who's a vinyl art and lenticular printing expert. That's the 3D printing kind of stuff, which is kind of cool. Right. And so we've got people who also come to us with lots of different types of artistic backgrounds too. So we have like screen printing artists, not just modular or synthesizer artists, but people who are really interested in all facets of music. And so our conversations when we get together are very interesting because people will ask or come at things from completely different angles than I would ever have thought of. And so we have these fascinating conversations. And I think in that way, those kinds of collaborations are really fascinating too, because we end up doing things that I think we don't really ever think of doing before as well. And all of our unique skills and expertise and backgrounds sort of chip in to make some pretty unique things happen.
I can kind of add on to that. I mean, so, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you knew me through the Max world, and that's actually where Joe and I and some other, other folks that have been involved in the group, Jeff Kowalski and other folks have kind of known each other through that world. So I'd been doing plenty of sort of software modular, or at least object-based audio and MIDI manipulation. Sure. But Joe's the one that sort of pulled me into the hardware modular world really not that long ago, 18 months, 2 years ago, something like that. And so just getting pulled into that piece was a beginning. But then Joe's also been really working on developing modules, designing some things, and kind of pulled me and lots of others in our group into that world as well, which is a piece that I never saw myself doing. I never saw myself designing for faceplates for modules or doing any of that kind of work. So we're really building off of one another's strengths and interests to really kind of, it's a cliche, but the whole is definitely more than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because it seems like sort of the collective concept tends to veer one of two ways. It's all people who can finish each other's sentences, in that they have exactly the same belief systems or exactly the same backgrounds, or it's the opposite, which is like a whole bunch of square pegs and round holes trying to figure out how to deal with each other. It seems like that's a little bit of what you pulled together.
Yeah, somehow we sort of hit on a magic formula, I guess, and just our personalities work really well together, and our skill sets and interests kind of complement each other really nicely.
Right. Now, Bill, I know that you are a school teacher, kind of like a STEAM school teacher, right?
Yeah, that's right. In fact,
and I would think that in addition to, getting a chance to do some of these things, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but it's got to be kind of like especially interesting for you because you have the opportunity to maybe even introduce some of this kind of activity to some of your students. Is that something that can happen?
It is to varying degrees. So one thing that's really nice about where we're situated in Ann Arbor is that we have a lot of community-based things that take place. So we've built up a really strong partnership with Ann Arbor District Library, which has a pretty amazing set of resources, but even more so, the vision and leadership of that organization is really incredible. So, for example, they've been organizing a mini Moog Fest every year for a couple of years. So, we've been invited to participate in that. And so things like that are a good place to sort of meet and interact with the larger community, including, I've had some students who showed up at those performances, for example. I'm still trying to figure out if or how I want to bring some of the things that I do with our work into the classroom. In some ways, it's kind of nice to be able to leave the classroom behind at the end of the day. But certainly there's a ton of knowledge that I've gained just from doing this work, whether it's electronics or digital fabrication or what have you, that I'm able to pull into my work. So my role is that I teach technology and engineering at a K-8 STEAM school. And so all of these things are really already kind of in my wheelhouse, but getting the opportunity to do this stuff in a completely different context in the education world has made a real big impact on me as an educator, even if it's not bringing the modular into the classroom necessarily.
I see. That actually allows you to be a person instead of just a teacher, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to have
great.
to have an artist persona to go back to in the evening instead of strictly in the classroom.
Right. Now, Joe, one of the things that you talked about as one of the linchpins for this collective is the concept of the instrument or instruments. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think we use this term pretty generically. In some ways, we're talking about actually like modulars, Eurorack modular, but we're talking about it pretty generically to be basically anything that makes audio-based art. And I think in some ways we might even include visual art in as well.
Yeah,
Bill's nodding his head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're very much into DIY. We really like to do that for lots of reasons. Many because we're curious. We like to do it because a lot of us have kind of a maker streak in us, and also just because it's a lot cheaper to do that. When I started in Eurorack, just as a very common story that you hear from a lot of other people is, when you've built your first module, you realized, wait, I can do this for a lot cheaper, and I can, and then wait, I can make my own, or I could change, this thing over here and modify it. So I think with instruments, it's also just coding as well. So, as we talked about earlier, there's the Maxim SP, but there's also like pure data that a lot of us have been getting into as well, and kind of diving into that.
Right. So in terms of real practicality, what kind of instruments is it that you guys are then making? I mean, is it trying a lot of proof of concepts and playing around and showing stuff, or are you focusing actually on making an item, a thing? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm struggling with how to say it, but
no. And the thing is, it's funny because this is something that we've been having kind of continual conversations, and we're struggling with ourselves in some ways, trying to
then
understand.
I don't feel so bad.
No, don't feel bad. We're sort of trying to figure out who we are and what we're doing. So the path up until this point is that Joe has really been doing a lot of work in doing module development and like designing some things. So, starting with a prototype for an idea that's based on the Teensy, and then starting to evolve that into possibly some other module ideas. And we've kind of gone down that route, and we've done some prototype things that haven't really seen the light of day in the sense that we're not trying to make them commercially available. Okay. We're using those as ways to kind of explore ideas and see if they might turn into something more. And then what we've started to do is think about designing and developing some modules that we may make available for sale, but also may use in more of like a workshop or DIY kind of setting, kind of bringing the education and community piece back in. So, for example, we have a very simple passive malt and a pretty simple passive dual low-pass gate that we're in the stages of kind of getting ready to be able to sell, whether it's to the general public or through a workshop kind of setting. And again, that's something that we're kind of struggling with is, are we a manufacturer or are we a group of people that likes to design things and make them available in a particular context, like a workshop or that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, but that is a concept, especially having like a module or module set that is oriented towards being part of a workshop. I mean, there's a good history. I interviewed Rob Hordyke, and he's got this basically the system, the Benjamin, that isn't even allowed to be sold as a standalone except through one agreement with Epoch, but otherwise it really is meant. It was designed. It was meant to be something that could be done as part of a workshop and that could sort of like stimulate people not only to come and learn how to solder or learn how to build something, but also end up with an instrument, a tool at the end that was inspiring to them, right? Because there is that combination with sort of the maker thing. It's like when I mess around with maker stuff or when I was doing that kind of thing, actually kind of the least engaging or the least interesting thing was something where it's like, here's a little bug you can build, solder these 5 things and now you're done. See you later. And they're kind of looking at this thing and going like, oh, okay. Where doing something that can inspire, I mean, building things that end up being either an instrument or at least part of an instrument can really, I mean, it can change lives and it certainly inspires change.
Yeah, for sure.
When you talk about like developing these things, you talk about having some prototypes that maybe aren't quite ready. And certainly on your site, I see some really cool looking stuff. Whatever a Traverse City is, it looks pretty awesome, right? But you're in the process of developing this, and it seems like you have a real strong foundation. What is your vision for the short to mid-term? Where do you really see yourself pushing? What do you think, like a year from now, you're going to be able to say about what the collective is doing?
Ooh, a year from now.
That might be different from what it is today.
Yeah. So I think to project out into the future, I need to step back maybe a year and kind of say that as a collective, we started off as just us 7 kind of getting together and, in secret almost and hiding away and looking at things. And then we thought, hey, let's get some more people in. And we started doing the public meetups, and those have been going along pretty well. And so it's almost like we have this inner circle of the core members and then this sort of way outer circle of these regulars who come every once in a while. And over time, we've realized that there's sort of a middle circle of these people who are kind of in between. They're not just so casual, but they're engaging with us pretty well. Right. And we need to kind of keep them with us. And they, some of them are involved in some of the projects that we're doing, either in the community or on the instruments, or they're, making music with us and things like that. And so I think over the next year, that's what we really want to start working on, is getting that sort of those folks in that middle position, kind of a place to engage with us with, because frankly, I think we've been kind of not very good at that. That people come up and say, I want to get involved. This is great. Let's do it. And we're like, okay, come to our meetup. But that's it.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So we've been, as a core team, very active on Slack. It's been kind of an interesting way of coordinating us, because we're all actually mostly in the southeastern Michigan area, but not all actually in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
So we've been coordinating a lot of our work just through Slack channels, things like that. And we're starting to work on maybe experimenting with bringing a few of those kinds of people into some of that as well. So we'll see. So in a year from now, we can tell you how that goes.
Sure. Well, it'll be interesting because kind of the growth curve with something like this can be a bumpy road, and it'll be interesting to see how that can grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way of looking at it might be in a year, if we were super successful at what we're doing, we would be able to point to some performances that we've done as collective members, whether it's something that we put together to showcase the musical work that we're doing and the visual work, or whether it's things where we were asked to perform as performers, that we'd have sort of a string of successful public meetups where people could get involved and engaged and meet other people and kind of go off on their own potentially even. and that we would, like Joe was saying, really involve members of that community who wanted to get more deeply involved in some of the projects that we're doing, whether that's helping design a module or working on a collaboration to do music or any of those sorts of things. Those are, again, it comes back to that music instruments community thing. So looking at success means looking at being successful in each of those three areas at the same time.
Yeah, and now we've talked about the community and the instruments, but this is a podcast about music. We probably ought to freaking talk about the music.
Sure.
What kind of things do you do musically, and how does that collaboration work? Do you all tend to have the same sensibility towards music, or is that sort of a mix-a-lot option as well?
So I think, we're all fans of electronic music of some kind, but a lot of us have very different backgrounds and interests, and it's kind of fun to see like how many of us play off of each other. So we've got like Bill, who's this sort of like dub techno guy, and it's very, like Jason and I make this when we get together. It's like a experimental, ambient, kind of noisy thing that's glitchy sometimes. And we bring Bill in sometimes, and everything gets cleaned up, and it's nice and tight, and it's musical. And we're like, wow.
Right. Yeah, surprising how that happened. Right?
I mean, it really is interesting, though. So, so like Joe said, the dub techno thing is definitely near and dear to my heart. Like that, growing up near Detroit and then having that Detroit having that sort of famous connection with Berlin, that stuff is really a core part of my sound. But I also really love ambient music. So like another one of our collective members is Jason Engling, and we're going to do a little neighborhood house concert kind of show in a couple of weeks where it's going to be primarily like ambient guitar and soundscape stuff. So, the two of us can pair off and go and do that kind of thing in that setting. Mm-hmm. Whereas like, Joe and David Minix, one of our other guys, might go and do a great kind of dance floor oriented, beat driven kind of set in another venue.
It's also fun because some of us have been in the music scene for quite a while and sort of retired and came back out of retirement. And others of us have, been in it for not too long or, never actually retired and just kept on going. So it's a good mix that way. And it's been really fun kind of intermixing what we've been doing. So like, once a year in summers, we've been doing this thing called our North Coast Modular Collective Summer Camp, where we all get together and we take over Bill's house. We have a few s'mores and we make some things and we make some music, and it's a lot of fun. And this time around, Nick and I, another one of the collective members, got together and to do some jamming. We started off with kind of head to head, like it was a chess match, like on a coffee table with my rack on one side, his on the other, nothing patched, and we just started patching. And he and I had never played together before, and it was very interesting how everything just clicked really quickly. We ended up in a space that neither of us, I think, would normally have gone on our own, into some sort of like really acid house kind of thing. It was
awesome.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
It was.
Yeah, we might have to do that again.
Yeah, you guys definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that though, because you just made me realize something that is kind of, to me, is somewhat unique with electronic musicians versus maybe other kinds of musicians. And again, I'm in seemingly some sort of reductive mode tonight, so we'll just reduce the rest of the world to being those people who aren't electronic musicians. But one of the things I would say is a lot of times when electronic musicians get together, the thing they do is weirder or very different from what they would normally do. Where I would say that when like folk musicians get together, what they tend to do is something that's like, the lowest common denominator between what the two of them do. For some reason and especially with the modular thing, I think because just being around another person's rack or whatever will inspire you to try something stupid or try something you never tried before, or it's a relatively low-cost thing because really an awful lot of modular music just sounds like you dropped the modular down the steps anyway. So it's all game, right? And it does seem like electronic music really does swing the door open for that kind of thing to happen. For you to say, "Oh my God, I don't know what the hell that was, but that was pretty cool."
Yeah, we've definitely seen some of those things, and it's been fun to see those unexpected sort of happy accidents take place as well. One of the other things that we did at this year's summer camp was I think this was the end of the second day. So our summer camp thing is 3 days. It's not sleepaway camp. It's just 3 very full days.
Right.
But it was at the end of the second day, and we were kind of done really by that point. We did a couple of ambitious projects this year. We built some filter modules, trying SMD stuff for the first time. We had a very long but very productive day, and it was probably 8:30 at night, and Nick brought out a pair of the Little Bits kits from Korg, those Little Bit synth kits.
Right.
And I thought, oh right, we'll play with these for a sec. And I think like an hour and a half later, I had like left the room, and like it had started with me and Joe playing with it, and then like I ducked out and Nick and Joe started playing with it, and I come back and I'm like, what is that drone FM synthesis-y kind of thing you've got? And they're like, I don't know, it just kind of happened.
Yeah.
So it's been really fun seeing those happy accidents happen, but also it's allowed us to become more intentional and to provide a space, because for example, we played a show at a new electronics focused makerspace in Ypsilanti, which is sort of the sister city, the next door neighbor to Ann Arbor. We played a show at the opening of that makerspace, and it was an opportunity for Nick, one of our collective members, to perform for the first time. He had literally never performed with his modular before. And so, having that community, that sort of safety net of other people around him, encouraging him and opening up the space, I think was really important. And so, I come back to that question you asked about what it would look like to be successful. And I think empowering more people and encouraging more people to be able to take that first step out would be another success factor that we could point to. And whether it's performing for this first time, or like I was saying, like building an SMD module for the first time, or even just soldering something for the first time, or whatever, that kind of encouragement is a big part of what we're about.
Well, one of the things, when you talked about the people who made up the collective, it was people from all over kind of the experiential map. Now, it's interesting to hear that actually some of these people didn't really have a performance practice, or it sounds like they didn't. What is, from among the group, what's been kind of like the biggest surprise in terms of somebody sort of like really embracing something you didn't expect? And what has maybe been the biggest surprise of something that people were able to add to the collective that you didn't think you would be interested in?
Wow, there's so many ways to answer that. There's one. Well, I'm thinking of two unexpected ways. One is, so we mentioned Jeff Kowalski, and he's a vinyl art, and he's into lenticular printing, which is that if you've ever gotten like a sticker or one of those gift cards that has the kind of ribbed like 3D stuff where you move it one side to the other, it like changes or something like that.
Yeah.
So he works on that in like a much bigger, huger scale, and he invited me out to his shop one day, and I thought, okay, that's cool, it'll be interesting. I'm thinking of those, cheap cards or something like that. I got to his shop, and I found out that he and his partner that he's been working with, they've been doing this in large scale for art, and it was like on a whole nother level, and it just blew my mind. So we started looking at this because it's acrylic and this little lenses, and you can print on it and everything. And thinking, what if those were panels for Eurorack? And we started diving down that angle. And then Dan Blades, who's also a screen printing artist, kind of hopped on that too. And we've been looking at all kinds of ways to really kind of mix those different types of mediums together to make panels that are just like really bizarre looking, and change in the way they look while you move around and look at them. We took a few of those to Detroit Modular that we don't have to sell yet, but they kind of like their eyes bugged out, and they're like, oh my God, we want more of these. And we're like, well, we can't sell these.
Right,
but, right. Yeah. So that was one. Another one is with so Jason Engling, who I've mentioned before, who's a longtime music partner with me. he's very good with making very textured music. He makes a soundscape that is amazing. And it's like, sometimes he's described himself as saying, my goal in a performance set for me is if you fall asleep during it, then I've done my job. Like he wants to really lay a really chill ambient kind of thing there. And he does a great job with that through sampling and so on. He's been on this quest for, I think, 2 decades now to make this ultimate sampler for himself that has these kind of granular principles behind it and everything. One of the things that was very unexpected is you mentioned the Traverse City panels or instruments. So we've been working on adding onto the terminal tedium module, which is like this Raspberry Pi thing that runs pure data in Eurorack.
Okay.
And so we've been working on extending that by, like, some of the modules we're making are MIDI controllers that Pure Data can use, or there's screens that kind of expose more information. There's like a touch screen, which is one of the Traverse City ones there. And he took that and just ran with it. And he came up with some stuff that just blew our minds.
Yeah. And Jason's, I think it's fair to say, like, he's been pretty cautious in his approach. Like, I think he's seen that descent into madness that can come with Eurorack.
Yeah, right.
So he's been kind of cautious in like how he's approaching it, and he's doing it really carefully in the sense that he has a very clear musical idea in mind.
Okay.
And the stuff that he's bringing into his existing world and his existing set of tools really has to serve that and not just be like to goof around with, but he really wants to serve the musical vision that he's gotten. So he's been, like Joe said, really fine-tuned on getting a few patches for the terminal tedium module built that really take advantage of what he wants to accomplish musically, and that's been really cool to see. That
sounds really cool, because what it sounds like is that what you've built as a collective is super amorphous. It can change to be whatever you need it to be. But it seems like the whole thing is actually built off of supporting one another. That's the way it sounds from the outside.
Absolutely. And it's from the tiniest things. Like, I'm working on a DIY power module, not one that I designed, just I bought a PCB and parts and whatnot. And I was like, I'm not going to just put regular headers on this thing. I really want shrouded headers so that it's safe, safer, at least, plugging in expensive modules. And so it's everything from like, hey guys, where should I source these? And like, with less than a day later, I had a fantastic, resource that one of our other collective members sent me, and I had parts on the way. Everything from those smallest things to the really big things, like, okay, what's our next big project as far as developing a module? How are we going to do this? What's our plan here? How are we going to approach this next thing? It really is all about supporting each other, everything from the very small to the really ambitious.
Man, we kind of burned through a lot of time already, and I haven't even really gotten to background stuff. I'm curious, for the two of you guys, how did you come to where you are now? I mean, it's this combination of interests of DIY and music and kind of instrument hacking and all that stuff. What is it that drew you to that? I mean, Bill, you kind of talked to having some background in like the Detroit techno scene. But I'm curious, what has drawn you particularly into the DIY thing? Because I think the DIY world is kind of a particular variant, but it's one where it seems very personal. When I talk to people that are very DIY oriented, it seems like there's personal reasons behind it, more than just, it's cheaper. It always seems deeper than that, right? And I'm just kind of curious where you're coming from, that the DIY thing has become such an important part of not only the collective, but kind of how you do as well.
It's a great question. I mean, when I first got started musically, it was definitely not, in one sense, it wasn't really anything to do with DIY. I was just, starting to buy my first drum machines and synthesizers and starting to make music. But I feel like it's funny, there was a punk graphics display exhibit that was up at Cranbrook Art Museum near us that I saw recently. And it kind of made me reflect on the fact that, I went to Michigan Tech, which is a very small college, relatively speaking, in a very small town in Michigan, but it's very focused on the engineering programs. And so as a result, there wasn't much of a local music scene. So the same sort of one music venue would host everything, folk and punk and reggae and all that stuff. And so I had plenty of friends where I would go and see their punk band on a Tuesday night, and they would come and see me DJ on a Friday night. And so that DIY aesthetic, not specifically about soldering or building modules, but like if you want something done, do it yourself. That was, I think, kind of infused in me from a really early point, a very important point in my musical development. So as I started diving deeper into electronic music, things like Macs became really exciting and interesting to me. I will say that I've sort of surfed that wave some in terms of like, I spent a good year kind of diving very deeply down the Max MSP rabbit hole. And I looked up at the end of that year and I went, I've built a lot of instruments, but I haven't made a lot of music.
Right.
And so that was the kind of clue for me to swing that back the other way some.
Sure.
And so as my life has sort of ebbed and flowed in different ways, becoming a maker in many different sort of media has become more and more important. And so as I started becoming really more active in the last couple of years and working on music again, seeing what Joe is doing with developing stuff that was, for example, like based on Arduino at first, that was already a tool set that I was pretty familiar with from, teaching my classes or just tinkering on my own. And so it felt like a very natural entry point. Whereas, I think if the entry point had been, hey, do you want to take this circuit board and here are these tiny SMD parts and do you want to solder these on and be really careful for like 4 hours so you don't blow one off of the table? I don't think that would have been as engaging an entry point. But getting started with a tool set and obviously an arena that I was already personally really invested in and interested in was a really nice entry point. And so the nice thing is, since that point, I've been able to, with the support of everybody else, been able to take on some of those bigger things and push myself into places that I never would have expected. Like I never expected to be doing graphic design that would end up on a front panel for a module, for example. But being able to sort of take some of the experiences I'd had with doing design and building graphic languages and doing interaction design, which is sort of what I did before I started teaching, being able to take advantage of that stuff in my background and pull those things in that supportive environment has just been incredibly rewarding.
And Joel, how about you? How did you get into how did DIY suck you in?
So I think I had started off getting back into things after a hiatus. I had been into circuit bending for a long time, kind of in the 90s, and the 80s as well. And so I don't ever claim to be any kind of electrical engineer or anything. And so my background in electronics is really through circuit bending. That sort of that art of just messing around with things and finding out what works and what blows things up. And that curiosity of how does this thing work? And then how can I tweak it to make it work in a very unexpected way so that it glitches out and sounds kind of cooler than before. And that kind of goes with the aesthetic that I like to go with too. We got all kind of hooked up together kind of through music, really, because like Jason and I used to play together a lot back in the early 2000s. And then we had sort of the kids in the grad school, the families and so forth. And we took the 5 to 10 year break. And then we came back and we said, how do we start getting to play music again? And we realized, well, we can't do it at night because of the family obligations. Can't do it on the weekends because of this and that. Well, we both work downtown. What if we just suck it up and go and meet at a coffee shop at 7 a.m. and just see what happens for an hour just before work? And so we did that and it worked. And so we kept doing it. It ended up turning into this thing that we kept recording over and over again. It's called the Coffee Cup Sessions. And along the way, we bumped into Bill, and we kind of like remembered each other from 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Because we were both sort of in the scene, but not really ever talking. Like, we just kind of knew of each other.
Yeah, we were in kind of complementary orbits, I think.
Yeah. And so we had him out for some coffee cup sessions, and we started just kind of playing music together a little bit every once in a while. And the same thing kept happening where we kept bumping into more people like Dan Blades, because he was kind of, coming back out and doing things as well. And so it just kind of kept growing like that. And I think along the way, we just kept talking. And some of those coffee cup sessions were a little more talking than playing. After a while, I said, well, let's just get together and just talk because we seem to want to talk. So let's do that. And that was sort of the very beginnings of this North Coast thing. And when we sat down and talked, that's when we started talking about how we're making our music. And lots of people pointing out these really cool things, these gadgets that they'd like been kind of working on. Dan Blades especially, because he had been really making a lot of really cool sound makers and things like that. He kind of inspired me along with some other people to get going with some stuff. And along the way also, I had this little Arduino kit that I got thinking that I'd, try it out with one of my kids, and we did it. And then I said, wait, that was a lot easier than the PIC chips from like 1990.
Yeah, right. Right. No kidding.
Yeah. So I just started thinking like, well, what else can I do with this? And we just kept going from there. And then I discovered Teensies, and then it was all over.
Well, now, one of the things that I find interesting is that a big part of, Joe, especially you, when you talk about the collective, the development of the collective, and even before that, the development of your interaction with Jason and stuff like that, a lot of it is about talking, and a lot about it is about conversation. Even at the beginning, when you were talking about who made up the group, one of the things you described was that it was good collaboration but great conversation. I mean, in a way, that sounds like a great formula, but it also seems like it could be a fragile one. What do you do to make sure that you continue to stimulate those kinds of conversations?
Well, I mean, I would just say at this point, we've been maybe really lucky because it doesn't take much to get us going on something that we're excited about. I mean, and you'll see that whether it's in our in-person conversations, like at a meetup, for example, whether it's just the core 7 members or whether it's a public meetup, you'll see that in evidence in our Slack. Like I just noticed that you, Darwin, that you've got a Pamela's New Workout that you just put in your rack, right?
Yes.
So I have one of those on the way, and as soon as I posted to our Slack that I had gotten one, there's this big long chain of like, it's so much fun. Wait till you try this. I can't wait. So it really is it doesn't take a lot to get us talking for a while about the stuff that we're excited about, just because, in a lot of ways, I think it's one of those things where without having this group of people, my wife would get very tired of hearing me talk about Eurorack Modular. You know what I mean? And she's an awesome artist and maker in her own right. But, there's only so much I can talk about what a great modulation source this thing is before she's kind of like, okay.
Go in the other room now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So having that outlet where you can't necessarily talk to a coworker about that and whatnot that's been really helpful.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add that there's the vibe of the public meetups as well, so we get new people coming in and we meet new people that way as well. But also just in this kind of area, we have all these amazing communities and resources that overlap and kind of, coincide with things that we're doing. So there's all this big maker kind of community going on that we're sort of, somewhat involved in, and there's a big music community here as well. So we have, lots of other areas where people come and go and talk with us, engage with us as well. I think we mentioned the Ann Arbor District Library. I mean, it's pretty nuts what they got going on there. They don't just check out books. They have synthesizers that you check out too.
That area is insane. I mean, I got a chance to, I was introduced to a place in Ann Arbor called the Neutral Zone, which is like a youth center that kind of is about performative arts and stuff like that. But they also have this publishing thing. And I was like, what kind of place on earth? I think for people who don't know much about Ann Arbor, they'd be shocked at what an amazing, I think it's one of the gems of the country, right? It's an amazing spot. And I don't know how you guys have like pulled together and maintained that place, but it seems pretty magical.
The joke here is that it's 4 square miles surrounded by reality.
Yeah, indeed. It's something that's really cool. To what extent do you think that you needed to be there in order for this collective to come together?
That's a really good question. I mean, because one of the sort of natural, as we're talking about this, one of the sort of natural questions might be like, so how does somebody who's interested get something like this going in their own area, right? And it's a question that I've turned around in my brain a little bit. And the honest answer is I'm not sure, but if I reflect back on what we've done, it's that we started small with a few people, and then use those tools that were out there, whether it was Slack or Facebook events or like that, to sort of build and build and build. Because what we kept realizing was there were lots of people in this town, even though we're pretty connected, there were lots of people in this town that we knew were doing cool things, but didn't necessarily know about each other or have a venue in which to talk about or do those things together.
Right.
So we see that as a big part of what we're trying to do is bridge those communities together, or just even those individuals together. So it's certainly it's fertile ground for doing this work, but I don't necessarily think it's entirely unique in the country or in the world.
Well, guys, I want to thank you so much again for taking the time to have this chat. It was really interesting to kind of dive in. What you have is pretty unique, while at the same time being something I think a lot of people have kind of dreamed about. How do I pull this together? One last question, though, before we go, because I think it aligns with what people sort of wonder about in terms of the kind of music technology that's kind of hot right now. Part of your name is got the modular thing in it. Do you worry that might at some point become kind of a noose or something that prevents you from exploring the next thing or a different thing or a bigger thing?
It's possible, but I think that because of our membership and the people who have come out already, that they already know that, at least locally, that it's not just about modular. It's about so many other things too. Bill did a presentation on patterning, and we've done like Ableton Live, and we've done Pure Data, and we've done all kinds of other things. We've even had like somebody was talking about like physics and
yeah.
So we go all over the place, and so I don't know.
Yeah, when we started talking about the public meetups, that was definitely something that we considered was, do we call it North Coast Modular Collective Meetup because of the fear that it might turn people off who weren't into doing stuff with modular? Right. And there was definitely some internal discussion about, do we do that? And then we decided ultimately it's not so much a meetup about modulars, it's sort of a meetup organized by North Coast Modular Collective.
Right. Okay.
So, you could also kind of play fast and loose with it and say that the modular part is about being able to plug different parts into each other instead of about the physical hardware thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is maybe a little restrictive in some ways, but in other ways, I think it gives us a nice focus with enough room to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, fantastic. I really look forward to where you guys take this. It sounds so fascinating. And it also sounds like fun in the big picture, but also fun on an every time you get together kind of way too. And this idea of having like a summer camp where you like burn your fingers off playing with SMDs, it just sounds like as much fun as tech artist geek could get into, right? So it just really sounds like an awesome thing, and I'm so glad that you guys have put this together and we're willing to share a little bit about it with me.
We're so glad that we could be here, and anytime that you're around, of course, let us know, and we'd love to have you as part of one of those things. And if you don't mind, I'd love to give a plug for the next public meetup.
Please do.
Yeah, so our next public meetup is Saturday, September 29th, 2018, and it's at the Ann Arbor District Library Westgate from 1 to 4 p.m. So we've been partnering with them, and one of the sort of fruits of that partnership is that they're going to be providing some space on a pretty regular, ongoing basis now for us to actually host our public meetup set.
That sounds amazing, and it's good timing because that'll be about a month out from when people are listening to this. So if you get a chance, go out and check it out. I think that it would be an amazing experience. Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate your time. And with that, I'm going to let you have the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Darwin.
Thank you.
All right, bye now. Thanks to Bill and Joe for hanging out and talking. That was really interesting. Makes me want to start my own collective, so that's probably the right story, right? I want to thank all you, the listeners, for continuing to tune in. It's just really great to hear from you all. Again, if you have any insights or if you just want to tell me what's going on or tell me how you listen to the podcast, It's ddg at cycling74, ddg at 20objects.com, or darwin.gross@gmail.com. Any of those will work. But otherwise, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for hanging out. And I hope to talk to you soon. Catch you later.